kudo to the kudo platform and also to our interpreters.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
Really appreciate it. Welcome to the third installment of Multilingual Summer Series. Let's talk about enterprise localization. I'm super excited to host this talk. I am Katie Botkin from Multilingual Magazine. And we have a great panel, as you guys can see. And we originally had Iris Suarez of Facebook scheduled for the panel, but she had a scheduling conflict, so Jennifer Johnson of Autodesk is filling in. She graciously accepted the appointment on this panel. So if you guys don't mind, could you introduce yourselves and explain a little bit what you do at your companies? Teresa, you're in the top.
I'm the lucky winner to go first. That's great. Yeah, I'm super excited to be here as well, and I really appreciate the invitation to participate in the series. I think it's been quite successful from what I've gathered so far. Happy to be on the panel with Nataly and Jennifer. In particular, Jennifer, I think I've known you for a long time now, which is great. So I am VP of Globalization and Localization at Salesforce, which means my teams are responsible for globalization of what we call tech and product, so R&D. So I quite often joke we do everything with the exception of marketing. I have a lovely colleague who takes care of the marketing localization. But yeah, I not only sort of lead the team that does all the actual localization work, but we really have sort of three hats that we wear. We evangelize and really set the globalization strategy across the product. And in terms of maturity models, outreach, influencing GTM and everything like that, but also globalization engineering as well, and then localization. So that's me.
Nice. Nataly, would you mind going next?
Yes, hi, and just wanted to echo what Teresa said. It's great to be here with these lovely ladies, including you, Katie, and I am happy to be part of this series as well. So I am VP of Localization at Hubspot, kind of the opposite of what Teresa said, that the majority of what we do is marketing. So we do a lot of marketing localization. Web content primarily, but also offline content. And we also oversee product UI localization, globalization, QA testing. But that is a newer function for our team. We started off in marketing and have kind of gradually gone into every other area to support legal, knowledge base, support all that type of content. We also, on our team, measure the non-English customer experience, the local customer experience, and we report out on how we're doing on that local customer experience, identifying gaps in the experience to zero in and figure out where we might be able to add more support. So that's what we do.
Great, thank you so much, Nataly. Jennifer.
Well, thank you for allowing me to join in place of Iris. Very happy to be here. Jennifer Johnson with Autodesk. I am the director of the localization platform area, and I've been with Autodesk since 2012. The team is spread across the globe, about 45 members. We have a hub in Dublin, Ireland, and also in Singapore, as well as the Bay Area and a few on the East Coast. I'm currently sheltering in place in Bodega Bay, where there may be some evacuation notices served because of the California wildfires. So, and my cats are growling at the tomcat at the door. So, let's see. We do all product and non-product localization. We also do a lot of work with legal, HR, sales, marketing, training, and I would say we own probably 95 to 98% of the business across Autodesk. There may be pockets where folks use agencies. We do everything from planning to we do globalization fixing, if you will. Once we acquire products, we may need to go into code and fix that. We do a lot of acquisitions, so that happens pretty frequently. And what else? I think that's about it. We're 45 people worldwide, but all of the execution is done by over 300 vendors. We use 4 different localization service providers, and we have 2 development vendors that we use to develop internal tools and solutions.
Thank you, Jennifer. And we had over 300 people signed up for this. I'm not sure, I can't actually see how many people are on right now, and we do have people on various platforms as well. But there's a good chance that some of them are more newbies to localization in general. So kind of as like a baseline question, how would you define enterprise localization? Since that's what this talk is about. Anyone?
I can start. I think that in building a small boutique solution, it's important to think, 3-5 years down the line, develop solutions that can run at scale over time. That's certainly the case for Autodesk. Teresa, I don't know, what would you like to add to that?
I totally agree. I think the first thing that comes to mind when I think enterprise is at scale, that particular sort of phrase, right? For us, I think it's the way we think about it. Everything revolves at Salesforce. Everything revolves around customer success. How do we enable our customers, regardless of what product they're using, to be successful? And so everything revolves around that for us as well. So how do we assure customer success in other markets, right? So we rarely, I think as newbies in the localization industry, a lot of people think about localization, and in particular as an enterprise, you need to open up the conversation about, how do you reduce risk for international markets, or how do you ensure success for international customers or multilingual customers, to broaden that scope a little bit. But I think what you said immediately, that at scale thing is really what sort of drives the enterprise.
Yeah, I would totally agree with what Jennifer and Teresa said. Scale is huge. Another big word that comes to mind for me is automation to enable that scale. Jennifer mentioned development resources, and I know Teresa does a lot with that. It's huge in terms of enabling enterprise globalization, enterprise localization. The other thing I would add is from my perspective, I think when you're a smaller company, you deal with projects, and then it evolves kind of into programs. But then at some point, it really kind of evolves up to strategy. And that's where, you're really arm in arm supporting the international strategy overall. And a lot of the things that have already been mentioned here by Jennifer and Teresa link to that. I think that's kind of where enterprise comes into play. I know a lot of vendors think about enterprises like, more volumes, more projects. But it's not really about those one-off projects. It's about the big picture and making customers happy in those markets.
I think the other thing is that I would add to what you just said, which I think is so on point, is the complexity increases with that scale, of course, right? So when you have, I was lucky enough that I started out when Salesforce was reasonably small, was already an enterprise, but the volume, the complexity was a little bit or far less than it is right now. And so we had to grow, and we got to grow with that, which is great, because then if you're lucky, you sort of, grow with it, and you're not just sort of, hit by this barrage of things. But that really also means that there's complexity across the scope and across the scale that sort of increases, which makes it fun, right? Because you need to have that flexibility. And it's always something new, even at a company that is reasonably settled into certain ways.
Yeah, my roots are in program management. And when I first joined Autodesk, we had advanced from project managers to program managers. So program was, the ownership of Autodesk, whereas the project manager sat on the vendor side. And we're evolving into portfolio managers. So that evolution, project, program, portfolio, is also, advancing in the enterprise, and probably a trend that we'll see in other companies as well, if not already.
Yeah, we definitely have program managers. We stay away from not just from our own mental image of project managers, but also to really sort of increase the visibility and scope or projected scope my team members have when they reach out to other products and really set it up. Because I think a lot of it is just like, how do you position yourself? And that program versus project is actually really sort of helpful. I like the idea of portfolio managers. I'm going to have to look into that.
Yeah. I think the other thing I would add for newbies on the complexity side that Teresa mentioned is when there is more complexity, the stakes are higher too, it seems. And that's something I think a lot of vendors that approach us and newbies who want to even work with us don't understand that, when you are a bigger company, and especially a publicly traded one, you have certain deadlines that you really cannot miss, and all the moving parts that are associated with a product launch or with any other big initiative, the stakes are just a lot higher for a company that has a lot of people employed and a lot of customers depending on that. So I think the stakes are higher.
The other trend that we see within Autodesk is a lot of our cloud products need to release on a regular basis. So we've introduced in the last couple of years continuous localization. We do still have an annual global launch, the big bang. And like you just mentioned, schedules are really tight, and you can't afford to fail on delivery. But this continuous localization brings in the whole automation piece, machine translation, at scale, and the ability to deploy every couple of hours, every couple of days, whatever the product requires. I'm curious at Salesforce, Teresa, it's been a while since we talked, how that's working for you.
So we still benefit from the 3 major releases a year and are not quite as advanced as what you just described. That's definitely working our way there. The question that came to mind when you said that is how do you deal with acquisitions? Because I think that's what I see. Like if I look at, to steal your word, the portfolio of our products by cloud or something, we definitely have sort of the very advanced, the very well set up machine that runs to get those products out at quality, at scale, on time. And then we have the acquisitions where I feel like, man, we just start over again. And so this, which is fun, right? There's aspects of both that really sort of make work interesting across the team, but at the same time, it's like the combination of it makes it really hard. So to answer your question, not quite where you are, but working our way there, and definitely having a sort of the variety in it in terms of maturity across products.
Yeah. So similar to what you've just described, we continually do acquisitions, and we've had acquisitions where companies are already releasing 13 languages, and they're fully globalized, they're localizable. And we've got acquisitions where we have to start from ground zero and we need to engage. And there was one such acquisition where we were hands-on in the source code for approximately 2 years just to get them to be localized. And then you've got the products that, well, we don't really want to launch in anything other than English for the next 4 years. That's our go-to-market strategy. So come back and talk to us in a while. It runs the gamut.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you guys, or women. So something that we talked a little bit about in our initial emails about the talk was flexibility, and the fact that everyone but I think maybe in particular people who are dealing with the global landscape are having to deal with a lot of factors, changing environments, and how flexible can we really get at the enterprise scale when we're talking about all of this?
I'm happy to jump in with some thoughts. I think a lot of companies are starting to feel the pressure to be incredibly flexible with from a staffing perspective, especially on the remote work side. I think we're fortunate in our industry that we've been remote friendly, pretty much since our inception. One of the things that I think has helped a little bit from my perspective and my team is, we are a continuous deployment shop. So we've always had to think about like round the clock support for localization because we release multiple times daily. And, that is always something that I've had in mind since the beginning. I've been at Hubspot more than 5 years, but when I started, it was just me. So initially, how could I provide like round the clock support for any issue that might come up? On the product side or on any, with regard to anything, because we do like all of our campaigns and everything that's live, continually generating traffic, leads, et cetera. So even for us, it's continuous marketing localization as well. I think that has put us in a good position that we are already quite remote first in our thinking. But what this new normal, so to speak, has highlighted for me is that people have less access to getting outside of their homes and doing things the way they normally would to even take a break from work, and not just my own team, but all the teams that they work with who normally are in offices. So I think that for me has really shown our need to be more flexible and our need to actually address head on issues of work-life balance for folks and things like that. I feel like more and more, because the pandemic has highlighted how important it is to understand what people are dealing with in their regular lives. I feel like us as managers of teams have to be even more empathetic and even more aware of what's going on in people's lives, because the pressure has gone up, the stakes are high, lots of people are struggling with things behind the scenes. It's, I think, put a much more human light on management from my perspective.
One thing that we're seeing, we hold a lot of like developer innovation days, hackathons, and then we have an annual event which we call Autodesk University, and normally that would happen in Las Vegas and around November, and we would see attendees up to the 10,000 mark. This year, obviously it's remote, we are going to have 60,000 attendees, and we're going to be doing live interpretation. We're going to do keynote speeches and real-time translation. It's a huge opportunity, and it's great exposure. And because people don't have to get on planes and spend money on hotels, these remote events just start to explode and implode in a good way.
Yeah, I think we've seen a bunch of
a really big part on that.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I think there's a huge opportunity in that. I think there's also a huge opportunity in sort of that, showing that flexibility, like Nataly said. I think we all went through this sort of shock period where everybody went into like, well, okay, now what? And there was a lot of outreach. And we in particular, I have a very small team. Given the scope of my team, it's very small in comparison to a lot of other shops, which means that we know each other really well. Also means that there isn't a lot of like wiggle room or extra bandwidth. And so we made sure that we check in with our team, and that included our partners. So we have one primary vendor that we work with, and we know almost every language team, and we knew what language teams were mostly impacted as it rolled around sort of the world, and the different countries and markets reacted to it. So that was really good. I love that it sort of there was a little bit more of we're all in the same boat initially, and so that brought some flexibility and highlighted some of these. At the same time, the one thing that we constantly did, and that I ran through with my, some of the managers of my team and with our vendor and some of my management chain, and prompted that is really sort of this prioritization, having a list in the back pocket that says, what are we stopping? Where are we shifting? Our company in terms of product did a gigantic shift to a certain extent, and we had to respond to that. And it really, having sort of this flexibility in mind, but also ruthless prioritization, so that if somebody became overwhelmed, we said, well, just stop that, or somebody else can jump in or really sort of drive those conversations. But they become, as the longer we sit in this, it feels like the harder the prioritization becomes and the harder those conversations. There's a bit of a prioritization fatigue, I think, I would say.
Yeah.
I would echo that, and reprioritization, because things keep changing. So and we're all working in technology, and a lot of the technology that we offer to our customers helps them with some of the issues that are being evidenced by the pandemic or highlighted. So it's I definitely would echo that, the constant prioritization and agility. It's really tricky in bigger companies to reprioritize that frequently, because you kick something off and it's hard to pull it back, So I think the vendors' flexibility is really important in all this too, because they kind of have to pivot as quickly as we do, and we know how many steps are in their chains as well. So that's been pretty tricky, and sometimes just making absolutely sure before we kick things off, what has changed in the last 24 hours, things like that, because things are changing pretty fast lately.
Yeah. And Natalie, you mentioned something about the human side of management and how that's becoming more apparent, which I love. I mean, that's great. And I think it's obviously something that enterprises need. But are there any specific examples that you can give about supporting your employees who maybe are having to do a lot of the care at home, and like you mentioned, just dealing with a lot behind the scenes? Are there specific things that you have been able to do to help that work a little better?
Yeah, so I feel really fortunate. Just the other day, our Chief People Officer put out a statement about the future of work at HubSpot and what we're doing to support employees. I have been amazed by how quickly our team has gotten things up. We have a lot of working parents with young kids at home. It's a huge percentage of our workforce. And even this morning, there was a virtual slime workshop for kids to attend. They're actually providing summer camp content, and all throughout the school year, because people were suddenly frantically trying to figure out how do I take care of my small kids at home? And I've got a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old, so this really hits home for me. How do I do that while I'm taking care of my teams, taking care of making sure I attend Zoom calls, praying I don't have a child run in right now and flip over the couch behind me on this webinar. So I feel really great that HubSpot has provided a lot of things. I think the two biggest things that I've seen help our employees are, number one, constant communication. Our executives have been having an AMA, Ask Me Anything session. Initially it was weekly, just to keep everybody apprised of what was going on, what were they thinking, what were the plans, how were we pivoting, how were we changing. And now the cadence has changed, but we're still doing regular sync ups in all the different time zones. Communication has been really key to double down on. And then just the specific programming that they're offering, the company is offering for all of our working parents, and also specific support groups, outreach. There was even a session on managing stress and that was for our LATAM team. That was someone in Mexico who did this virtually and had a session where we're all standing and doing pressure points and stuff. I'm like, wow, this is amazing. I wish I had time to attend all of them. But yeah, I think those things have really helped, and just really embracing remote first, company-wide, not just with our teams, because our teams tend to be more remote friendly. I could talk about that forever. Sorry.
Yeah, I think it's fabulous to see that a lot of companies are doing this. We have had a very similar sort of setup. We had weekly, they're still going on, weekly all hand calls that were in particular at the beginning very open, transparent, and there was this sort of weird element to them where, as you saw some of your management chain or leadership, in their bedrooms or living rooms or whatever, and it really kind of brought it all on a very much on a human level, like you both said. Lots of outreach and stuff like that. One of the things, and so I don't really have anything to add except for one example that I thought was really interesting. I have a senior leader in the organization who very early on went in and said, I have to reduce my hours. I'm going to work, 4 or 5 hours a day because I have small children at home and we're sharing, the responsibility for them. And so reducing hours without having to go in and then catching up from 8 p.m. to midnight or something like that was something that wasn't just okay, but it was also modeled and is modeled. I have a number of people who have small kids on the team who now are going back to school. My kids are teenagers, and I actually have a freshman in college, which brings different kind of questions and challenges, but very, very different than if you have a kindergartner or something who now has to do remote learning. So not only the ability and the sort of, let's talk about how do we prioritize and give you the hours, but really that leadership, the people in very high level positions are modeling that and are very transparent about that. I thought was really important because it gives everybody the opportunity to say, well, if she's doing that or if he's doing that, I get to do that as well. And so that to me is something that we did really well.
So I would second what Nataly and Teresa just said. Autodesk has been doing a fantastic job. One of the things that we talked about in a recent managers call was modeling this behavior, taking some downtime and not answering Slack while you're on vacation. And then the company has been giving us, they gave us 2 Fridays off in July, and I think there's going to be 1 Friday off in August. And people are encouraged to take their vacation, even though it may just be a staycation. And managers are definitely keeping a closer eye on their individual contributors and direct reports to make sure that burnout isn't happening. But the company itself is doing all kinds of wonderful things, including if you've got a child, if you have children 12 and under, you can take 2 to 3 hours per day, 3 times a week, I believe. You just have to log it. And that's a great benefit for folks who need to take advantage. And the flexible time is something I've always been used to. I'm a single mom. I work with 3 different time zones. And so I've always given myself flex time.
Yeah, I think we're part of maybe the allure of the enterprise is that there's a construct around a lot of these things that maybe in a startup is not even there yet because you're in this growth mode, pandemic or not. But there isn't. We I think can take advantage of some structure that has been put in place. I mean, I've worked at startups that didn't even have an HR department, and we now have this gigantic organization that is split in I don't know how many sub-organizations that are really defined and designed to help the managers and the employees and everybody to be successful. So there's something there. I also think the modeling is really important, but I also want to say that there is a little bit of a trap, right? We think, we have everything. We have these series on well-being and pressure points, and we have here's a yoga class, or here's a belly dancing class, or here's this and stuff like that. We actually have a bi-weekly, twice a week, we have a series on that with different guest speakers that are actually open beyond our company. But to really do it is still another thing. So we, like you said, Jennifer, we really have to take good care of our direct reports and individual contributors and sort of almost make them take the time off. I have conversations with my team where I said, it's time for you to just take Friday off. Just don't answer that Slack or your phone or something like that. If you just sleep in, whatever you do, like go for a walk or something like that, because it's not enough to just offer it. It really, I feel a little pushy sometimes when I say, hey, you need to take a break, because it sounds like I don't trust you that you're, doing well. But it's more of a, please take advantage of it, because we're in this unfortunately, for a much longer time than we thought we would be.
Yeah, I would echo that, because a lot of my team, they work in primarily 4 different offices in Dublin, Berlin, Tokyo, and Cambridge. And some of them work remotely, but the majority of the team worked in an office, but always had the option to work flexibly and from home. And that was, I think, a lot of the time their cue to go home. It's like everybody around them is leaving the office, so they would leave the office. And, for those who, are younger or don't have, kids and, they're trying to advance in their career, some of them want to work more and they don't have that cue anymore to stop working. So I find people online at weird times and I'm like, why are you still working? Stop answering Slack. I'm just turning you off, I'm finding myself doing that a lot more than I used to, because there's no cue that the sun is going down, and it's like, people are going to have lunch and people forget lunch when they're, I've worked from home a lot in my career, so I kind of know what those perils are. But for a lot of people, this is a new muscle that they're just building for the first time.
Yeah, thank you. On behalf of everyone, thank you for doing that. Giving people some flexibility and actually encouraging them to take it. That's great. Did you have anything else to add to that, ladies? Okay. I just wanted to pause really quickly and let our listeners know that if you have questions, you can actually ask them. There's a little messaging icon on the side of the Kudo interface, and we will be taking questions in several minutes, and we'll have about 30 minutes to answer some questions. So if you have questions as we're going through stuff, please note those, and I'll be reading those later. So let's pivot a little bit to talking about automation, because it's something that obviously enterprises use all the time. Have you found that it has changed recently? Like, your use of automation, has it increased? Have you found any ways to sort of do things with automation that are helping with issues that are arising with the current situation, COVID and everything?
I have a couple I can throw in. Yeah. I mean, we all use machine translation, and we're familiar with the actual translation technologies. I think where I've seen an increase, because we've already been doing that, like anything we can try to automate on the translation side, I think we always do. Like, that's kind of our instinct as localization professionals. But what I've seen an increase in terms of like net new automation needs is around communication. So like lots more Slack notifications and, instant type communications and automation of those. That's been really important for my team. We're also, continually working on automation of like moving content from place to place and stuff like that through, custom development. But another one I'm seeing more and more requests for, and I know Jennifer mentioned, the e-learning training, online educational content. We have a lot of educational content with Hubspot Academy, and that's something that there've been a lot of requests for, like, how do we like quickly localize these videos, subtitles, or can we do, somebody even sent me stuff about like deep fakes and how that's applying to localization. I know I shared that with you, Teresa. So, there's increased interest in video content and getting that localized faster and faster than ever. And I say faster because it's always, that's always the priority, is like speed and getting things back quickly. Those are the two areas I've seen the most increase in. I think MT, we just continue all the time to, explore opportunities there. But for communication and like real-time communications and educational content, those are kind of the two themes that I've seen.
Yeah, I would echo the same. We have a huge increase in volume for video, and depending on how the English source is developed, will dictate how quickly and how expensive or inexpensive we can do those videos. So we're trying to come up with guidelines, best practice, and really try to educate internally on how to create these videos so that we can do closed caption. The other piece of automation, it's not been because of, so the video becomes really important with the pandemic because the video content is, just going to go up. We started doing some automation work around our automation testing for our product. So what happens when you run your automation test is you get an inordinate amount of false positives. And it takes a human to go in and check, is that really a concatenation issue? Is that a string issue? But we're using machine learning to teach the automation test how to basically filter out those false positives. And, we have our flagship product, AutoCAD, has like 3 million false positives. So multiply that by 13 languages. And if you can get that number down using machine learning, then you've really accomplished a lot and driven the time and the cost down.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I think both on the content side, I can't talk to the video because that's on our sister team with the marketing side. I think there has been an increase in that. I see it a little bit in the increase in terms of our training product as well, but not as much. I think it's a newer product for us, and there's other obstacles that we still have to work through from an international point of view. We've both on the content and the product localization side, we've been in the middle of sort of a push for building tools and building frameworks that now have a little bit more momentum. And so that's good. We've been, in comparison to a lot of other enterprise companies out there, in a position where we are deeply or heavily prioritizing what goes where, and get away with more human interaction than automation on that. Which obviously, going back to what we said earlier about scale, is not going to hit that enterprise scale. So that's why we had that investment in terms of frameworks and on both sides. I think we're lagging a little bit behind there. What we've seen in response to the pandemic there is that we shift work that is internally to our partners, that there's a lot of flexibility going back and forth there. And a lot of collaboration, in particular on not sort of a supplier to or a customer to supplier kind of level, but really in terms of a collaborative approach as a partner in both.
I'd be curious for both of you if this has happened to you. It has happened to me as a result of the pandemic. It's not exactly an automation need, but increased needs for different types of reporting. Like that has certainly hit me. It's like, oh, what's going on with this? Can we figure out, is there a localization issue there? And like different areas that we didn't necessarily think about before. Suddenly I have to figure out, oh, how do I structure reporting for that? And, reporting seems to be another kind of not as big of a theme as the other ones that we've been talking about, but the reason I mentioned is because I've been trying to automate some of that reporting. So I don't know if you have run into that at all.
Yeah, we are definitely hitting that challenge right now at Autodesk. We have huge asks for key performance indicators, KPIs. we have a strong need for dashboards, and we've had KPIs and dashboards in the past, but I think it will definitely become increasingly important at any given moment to be able to report out to whoever's asking. And the big question then becomes, what do we report out on, and what do we want to measure, and what is the rest of the industry doing? And so we're in the process of figuring that out.
Yeah, I would second that. I think we're about a month or two away from that, and we're trying to anticipate what it is, not just in terms of financial, which obviously is under a lot of scrutiny right now as we pivot, and I have to shift, my budget to different areas, or just try to make it stretch further or whatever. So I think I'm anticipating a lot of these questions, or I'm trying to anticipate a lot of these questions and sort of have that ready. I think the focus is just like we pivot in terms of what is important. I think that every other team is working through that as well, right? So, and eventually they will come to us. And we're working with the regions, and I definitely see an increase in terms of numbers or KPIs from them as well.
Thank you. So not exactly related to that, but not entirely dissimilar. Have you seen a change in markets, places that you're localizing into, or potentially places that you're anticipating changes in localization worldwide? Nataly, you're nodding along.
I think there's many ways we could approach that question.
Right, of course, yeah.
I think both Jennifer and Teresa mentioned already, like we started to see this shift happen in different markets sooner than in the States, for example. Like, as the pandemic started to make its way around the world, I think all of us started to see the impact. Like my team in Tokyo was in quarantine before, it started to really hit other places. And so it's, in terms of affecting different markets, like I, first and foremost think of the employees in those markets and the customers in those markets. We definitely, in terms of customers, have seen certain markets react more severely than others, or different times than others. Our CEO even mentioned it in our earnings call that, it seemed to hit in Europe sooner, the impact, what we saw in terms of growth. We actually are putting out reports on how the pandemic is affecting deal creation and growth among our customers. We've been putting out reports continually on that. Our marketing team has been releasing that information every week. And what's interesting is you can filter by geo, by seeing what's going on in Europe or Asia or North America, and you do see different trends in the patterns. Like, how are those individual countries affected? And a lot of it depends on not just the cases per day and the rolling averages of cases and deaths per day, but also unemployment to begin with, and what are the economic conditions of those markets, and are there any government stimulus packages to help people? And so we're seeing all that play out at the micro and I would say the macro level in different economies. It's interesting though, because it's like, you can't say like, oh, Europe is through this now, because it changes every day and every country is, so it's like, I couldn't give like a quick and snappy, punchline about like what is happening with different markets. What I will say is local is more important than ever. And the local experience and the local news and the local intel and the local sources have suddenly become way more important, even for us, like, living here. Like I pay way more attention to my local news and what's happening in my community than ever before. And I think that has kind of taken us from maybe where we had maybe a middle ground focus to where, whoa, we better really be hyper local specific now when we plan, when we think about things. And I view that as a benefit to localization because it enables greater awareness of country-specific behaviors, country-specific patterns, sometimes even regional or city specific. So I like that local focus. I think it's good for us. probably said more than I should on that already. Sorry.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, so historically at Autodesk, we have had, we haven't had a company-wide strategy, go-to-market strategy. I mean, we have, but it happens at the product level and the industry that we're serving. So for instance, AutoCAD is available in 13 different languages, whereas Revit, maybe 8. So we don't enter every market in the same fashion. However, at the C-staff level, they are introducing a country tiering project that's going to be carried out over the next couple of years. So we're going to be much more methodical about the languages that we serve, the locations that we enter into the market. It was always sort of piecemeal depending on the product manager or the business owner, but it's going to be top down at this point. And so I'm happy to see that because I think it's going to increase customer experience. If you're a Japanese customer and you click on a link and 3 levels down, you get to English content, that's not a great user experience. And there was really no one looking at all those details and layers. So that's going to help in the long run. And I'm really happy to see that it's so important to the company at the top level.
Yeah, that's really interesting because we're in a similar, we have stops and starts of similar projects that we're trying to bubble up. In our core sort of like flagship legacy product, from early on, we were one code base, one stack. So everything went into the same set of language, regardless of sub-product or cloud or whatever. With acquisitions, that was watered down. What we see and what I used to call sometimes snarkily the schizophrenic language strategy was that we had this tiering within that product, but that didn't jibe with our corporate marketing side or didn't necessarily jibe with what we internally and externally said as the core markets or something. But that's because we may have a company that is a customer of ours that is based in Europe, who then serves, the rest of Europe and needs all those languages that even from our point of view is not necessarily a major market, right? But we enable that customer success by providing that smaller market with the right language support. It leads with acquisitions and maybe prioritized products. It leads to, sort of a gap sometimes because we may have one product here that is connected to a product over here where you can run into that language barrier because there's Korean supported over here, but not in the other product. And so that's very tricky. We haven't seen an increase in new languages that we truly support. We have a third tier of languages we call platform languages, where we provide the ability to a customer to build an app on top of a platform, including sort of grammar support. We have an open source grammar engine that allows that to be grammatically correct in the languages that we support. And we see some weird languages in inverted commas that you wouldn't think of as an enterprise. Some of the Indian languages, but not for India, but for the US. Some of typical languages, the African languages that we saw also, again, not to enter the market in Africa, but to support the immigrant communities around the US as companies and communities build on top of the platform. And so that's been really interesting and really exciting. At one point, I knew more about African languages grammar than I ever thought I needed to know. But it's a different type of sort of influence in the enterprise. And I don't think we would ever really truly localize into those products, but being able to provide that support for a community by making that available is great.
Yeah. This is so fascinating because I think, it's a little understood. I should say, a minimally understood area in software and just tech companies at large. is this issue of prioritizing countries and languages, and what degree of support do you give to each language and country based on the experience, based on so many criteria, that it starts to become super complex very quickly. And, you both are, mentioning how this is playing out in your companies. And I think it's fascinating. I think no one can really figure out a way to do this that applies to all companies, because every company has such different situations with like acquiring a company that already has customers in some of these markets, and you can't just discontinue those languages, but then how do you connect that to other parts of the experience, and if they're supporting it in this language, like, do you suddenly offer billing in that language? Do you suddenly offer terms of service in that language? And it starts to get really complex. We've been working on that as well. And we do have like different degrees of support for different languages. Like you mentioned the concept of platform languages. We have basically content creation languages or resource languages that you can create content in. And it's interesting to see, as you said, some of the languages are surprising. Like, oh, why do we have so many people creating content in Catalan or a language like that? And it sometimes, well, Catalan's probably not as surprising, but some of the others might be. And it's not always people from that country, as you said. It's people who might be serving people in that country, but they're headquartered in different countries. So it leads to a whole set of decision-making criteria about like, how do we decide to support that language? Is it the amount of revenue that comes from those portals? Is it the number of pieces of content being created in that language? Is it, some other criteria, how it connects to our broader company strategy or country strategy? So it really opens up a lot of back to our complexity topic.
Yeah, I think this is the increase that we saw in response to the pandemic, because we have a number of customers who created their own COVID response, right? Whether that's a big city somewhere, in terms of community outreach. And it's exactly what you said. It's like what we need. Our platform languages are probably close to what you call content creation languages, because all of a sudden you have to support that alphabet, that ability to build content in that language. And I think that is sometimes easier for one of my product managers to understand, because maybe that's closer to home than, oh, here's a country on the other side of the world that we hope is going to sell some products, right? So I mean, there was a very human aspect to that story, and that was an easier story to create support for that work for than, let me see whether we can land this customer over there in, I don't know, whatever country it was.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Exactly. Yeah, it's fascinating how it's, Jennifer's talking about the top down, country planning, but then we've got the bottom up kind of customer driven needs to address as well. So we're kind of like in the middle of all of that, and making sure that we solve for all of those parties. It's pretty tricky.
Yeah, if I could add one more comment to that. I often think about localization and globalization, not necessarily the driver of everything when it comes to international, but definitely the conduit to connect the dots so that the right conversation happens. I don't always have the resources and the budget to make all of that happen, but I can try my best to connect the people that will either create that budget for me or that drive for me. But I think that is a big part of globalization in an enterprise, is to connecting those dots, to connecting those regions and individual people within regions to where maybe some of the gaps are, even if there is no official position to fill that gap.
Yeah, we're the global glue.
Yes, that's a good one. I like that.
I often say that to people on my team, because sometimes we're in positions where it's not our job to do certain things, but we are the only ones who are connected across regions and functions. Mm-hmm. And so, sometimes people will push back and say, well, that's not my job. Like, the other team should do that. I'm like, yeah, but we're the global glue. Like, we have to, if nobody else is going to connect these teams and regions, like we are kind of the bridge, to do that. So.
Yeah. The other piece of advice I would give to somebody who's maybe just starting out, if you've got a good foothold in the company and, you've got a pretty good network, is to get in on those discussions as soon as humanly possible. It's so often the case that localization is a mere afterthought. Oh, well, we didn't really think about that. Oh yeah, we should have thought about the Japanese market, before we made certain decisions and that sort of thing. So I would just strongly encourage folks to get yourself a seat at the table early and often.
Thank you. We have 1 minute left before our questions start. So does anyone want to add anything very quickly before we go into the audience question period?
I think Jennifer rounded it up quite nicely there.
Great. Well, so I'm going to go to, as I mentioned earlier, if you're tuning in now, there's a messaging icon on the side of the Kudo platform. So I'm going to be reading some questions from there. The first one is from Janine A. And she asks, I would be interested in hearing how you use your localizers, one or multiple, and how much localization engineering skills or knowledge are in-house or with a localizer, and how has it changed as your localization scale and scope has grown?
I can start. So we leave it up to our vendors to decide how many localizers or translators they put on any given project, depending on the volume, the turnaround request. So it varies by product, by project. And I mean, we advanced from early days, we had in-house translators, but now all of that is happening externally. We're using machine translation. We're using human post-editing. So the number of translators hours have gone down. We have in-house localization engineers that are very versed in the localization process that will handle escalations at the vendor site level. So it is important to keep in-house talent, but you can lean quite heavily into the language service provider and choose someone reputable, talk to a number of people who have been working with different vendors, and you'll probably get some good names.
Yeah, so we are a completely outsourced shop as well. We have some language talent in-house that's basically program managers that probably came from the linguist route. My team is still 80% from somewhere else, or native speakers of some other language. We do have some engineering in-house that is less localization engineering in that sense, but more sort of general script support as we prep different file formats or something for something that is newer. We have an entire team of engineers that build globalization features and are responsible for our infrastructure, but they're not really, they're core engineers, they're not really localization engineers, and we rely on our partner to do most of that skill and those tasks. But again, we don't have a very typical vendor relationship. Our engineers and program managers on the vendor side are fully entrenched in our in our systems. So they're really like contractors working with our systems, source control and everything like that, which meant that we don't have those skills in-house, and except for sort of a buffer where we need to let's say troubleshoot or something. And hopefully, as we progress through sort of a growth, or at one point a growth period again, we can focus on bringing the product management skills, the influencing skills of our program managers to bear with our product, rather than this sort of interaction with the vendor.
Yeah. So we work with outsource. We have a hybrid model where we have a fairly large in-house team for the size of company that we are. We're a lot smaller than Autodesk and Salesforce. But we do have all of our, what we would consider fully supported languages in high priority markets where we're growing, basically accelerated growth countries. We have internal linguists on our team, emphasis on plural because we have to have more than one just due to the round-the-clock, ongoing, continuous nature of our business, not only our software delivery method, but the marketing content that is continuous as well. So we kind of can't rely on vendors for that because we have a lot of very highly stylized content that's very brand specific, and our in-house linguists usually develop the style guide, develop the brand voice in that language along with the marketing counterpart for their region. But then that tends to grow, and the amount of content from everything from press releases to in-app notifications that have to be on brand, even sometimes legal web pages and things like that. Our in-house team is basically in that kind of editing, QA, coaching, training capacity for our external linguists, but they also support real-time translation for mission-critical communications and things like that. So we really rely on having a team that's available, kind of that we control fully and is at our disposal, but that really knows our brand and knows not just our brand, but all the ins and outs of like all the different systems that we work with. That may change over time, of course, as programs mature, but we only see the need for internal resources growing. So we have continued to grow that team because the value is really there for us at this point. But we do outsource the vast majority of our translation work. On the engineering side, we have some folks who handle product internationalization that are directly on the product team. We also have developers that my team works with that sit on the IT side. And they build custom tooling for us, but they're owned by that team, but we work with them and, help budget for them and all of that. So it's kind of a very matrixed approach for us, but so far it works. What I will say is if you asked me this 6 months ago, 12 months ago, everything changes so fast that a year from now, it will probably look different because everything is changing constantly. But one thing that has been a constant for us for 4 years is we've always had internal linguists and we've always needed more. And our marketing counterparts always like, you need 3, when we had 1, it was like, you need 3 more for each language. We're like, maybe not so fast, but everybody sees the value because they really help the brand voice and they really help us with our marketing content in particular, and now more educational content and other types of content. So that's where we are.
Nice, thank you. So the second question is, how do you handle confidentiality? It's a broad question, but interpret as you will.
So, I'm assuming this means with our vendors, or
yeah, I don't know. That's what the question is. So I'm not sure.
I mean, our legal team on the Hubspot side, our legal team has certain standard, confidentiality agreements and things like that, processes that we go through to ensure confidentiality. Like on the data protection side, there's always conversations about, GDPR and data privacy and all of that we're, constantly being trained on and all of that. So I can say, confidentiality is a top priority for vendor agreements and, pretty much governed by legal.
I just
there was actually a confidentiality working remotely is the clarification for the question.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it may have come up as we were talking how we dealt with sort of this remote sort of setup that we all have to deal, the new normal that we have to deal with. We, despite the fact that we're pretty much a in-office kind of company, we've always had some remote workers that were hired remotely. I have a remote team member. And so because security and has always been a big issue, trust for our customers in our technology and our products is really, really high. So we're able to take advantage of that. And I think we have a gigantic IT department that manages most of that. But that's also why we, in some cases, have actually given laptops to some of our partners, because we need them to adhere to exactly the standards that we have set as a company. And I think that's probably, once again, an advantage of being at a big company. There's many disadvantages too. We keep thinking about the positive aspects right now, but there's definitely some downsides to that, but that is a plus. And in terms of like what you said, the like contractors and everything like that, that's handled by legal, of course, as well.
Jennifer, did you have any?
I think you both covered it nicely. Thanks.
All right. So the next question is, let's see. As in-house localization managers, do you use outside contractors for translation under certain circumstances, such as unexpected needs that popped up or tight deadlines? If so, how often and how do you go about selecting outside suppliers?
So I can start. We, once upon a time, had 130 different language service providers. One would translate the documentation in Spanish for one product. One would, translate the strings. Another one would do the testing. It was super crazy. About 12 years ago, maybe 13 years ago, we narrowed that down to 4 vendors, and now we're at 3 vendors. And we went through a very long request for procurement and proof of concept, and just choose the best ones, and we've stuck with them, and we monitor them. They are trusted partners. So I wouldn't subscribe to more is better. I would say less is better, and just work very closely with them and sort of train them how to work best within your company. And they are an extension of the team.
Yeah, same. We don't have a ton of providers. We only work with a handful, really. And if we have a need for like a quick turn project or something like that, we do have the option to add more resources, but we would usually do that through our vendors first and foremost, because the question on confidentiality and security, it's actually a pretty deep process of vetting to bring on a new vendor. And so it's much easier and faster for us to work with existing vendors than it is to acquire new ones. So, I'm sure Jennifer and Teresa get bombarded, as I do, by emails and LinkedIn messages and all kinds of stuff saying, hey, we offer 200 languages and blah, blah, blah. It's not even a question of that. Like, it's really, about capacity. And if there is a vendor that offers something truly innovative or new that could add value, then maybe, some kind of niche service, maybe we'd take a look, but most likely we won't, because it's a lot of work to onboard a new vendor. So I would say for vendors that have customers like us, the important thing is to keep those relationships, going strong, because we ideally will add capacity, add different languages, add new services through those vendors versus just adding tons and tons of vendors. People seem, I think a lot of times on the vendor side, it's easy to think you can just test a new vendor very easily, because from their perspective, it's like, oh, we get a project and we test it. It's not that easy on the buyer side. On the buyer side, it's way more hassle for not just us, but for all of the people in legal, security, finance, all of the other teams that we depend on to bring a new vendor on board. So it's not just a question of sending over a project. It's like there's a lot of steps involved, and we don't want to do that for just $1,000 project or something. It would be incurring far more cost on all the people that we asked to touch that project and add that vendor if we were to try to test. So it's like, it's not even worth it to test in many cases. Sorry to be like a doomsday type scenario for us out there, but I want to be honest.
I think that just to add to one small comment, I think that there has been a shift over the last 10, 15 years in the industry from very typical, you're our supplier, so just give us the words kind of setup to building these partnerships, right? You both sort of mentioned that, you have internal resources who then partner with an external linguist, or Jennifer, you call your vendors the trusted partners. And I think that's definitely what we have. And I think it's really, truly a business partnership. And so to upend that, because potentially somebody said, hey, I can do it 3 cents cheaper, which is the wrong conversation anyways, it's not cost efficient, it's not time efficient, and it's almost, it leaves a strange taste in my mouth, because that feels like I'm just they think I'm taking advantage of my resources. And I know that we ask our resources for a lot, but hopefully we're not taking advantage of them, but I really have a partnership with them.
Yeah. Thank you, all of you. The next question comes from Mary Marks. Realizing that you are all representing tech companies, what differences do you see between tech localization strategies and those deployed by other verticals, such as industrial or government users of localization?
I mean, I can't speak to the government, but I would imagine it would be much more regulated. I think that one piece of advice I could give, and we employ this at Autodesk as well, is we have subject matter experts that are in country who speak the native language and understand their industry explicitly. So, we want to launch a product in Russia in the manufacturing industry. We use subject matter experts to vet that technology and really guide us in the right way. So it doesn't have to be a full-time employee. You pay them on the side. They review whatever content that you need them to review. And then if it's government, I mean, obviously there's a lot more regulation. So you need experts on all of the laws in that country and that government. And again, you would want to lean heavily on subject matter experts.
Yeah, I can't even really answer that from any direct experience. I mean, when I was at Common Sense Advisory, we did some research on the government sector, and it was very, there were these big multi-year contracts often that, vendors would would win. And, the risk to their business was always that they would win that. They would have a big kind of windfall almost, but a huge disruption to their business often, because they would quickly try to staff up for those contracts, and then they would often lose them the next time they came up for bid. So I always have viewed government as kind of a less stable area, and I know the profit margins for LSPs are smaller there, but the amounts tend to be big of the contracts. On the tech side, like the only thing I can say that really I think makes it stand out from other industries is the high pace of growth. And maybe the continuous nature, at least speaking from agile, continuous deployment perspective, like the continuous, deployment nature of things is different. So, whereas some industries you do get more project-based type business if you're an LSP, I think that it just emphasizes the point that Teresa made about the strategic partner, close partner relationship that tech companies have with their vendors.
Yeah, I can't talk to government either. The one thing that I would say though, in terms of different industries, is what you basically echoing what you both said. I had some experience in terms of other industries when I was still on the vendor side. And I think that the level of detail is different on the tech side. I think software to a certain extent, tech sort of setups and processes are slightly more forgiving than some of the other verticals that are out there in the industry. Like if you think the ever often cited example of medical device, right? Whether we have a typo in help documentation on how you import context into a CRM is very different than if you were to do this on a medical device setting or something like that. So I think we have incredible speed and incredible sort of growth and pivots in the tech industry. At the same time, we have almost the luxury of a bit more forgiving kind of audience than other verticals. I think it's even more true if you go into consumer products versus, business software, like in our case, right? I mean, if a company or a customer pays thousands and thousands of dollars or whatever it is, hundreds per month in subscription, they have a certain level that they expect. If you get a product for free, there's a different level. But I think the scrutiny is much higher in many of the other verticals. I think tech localization is prominent because there's so much of it, and we're all very vocal. But I think there's a bunch of jobs that are a little bit harder than ours.
Thank you. All right, next question. How do you measure the level of internationalization and localization across different products? For example, how do you decide whether an acquired company is ready to be localized?
Well, I don't know. Maybe Teresa and Jennifer will have better answers to this than I do. We have very independent, autonomous teams in terms of product development. So what we would probably notice on the internationalization side is if a given team started to have multiple issues pop up, we would have to spend more time with that team and training them and working with them. But we don't, I guess we could measure that in terms of like the number of bug reports that are tagged as like internationalization issues with a given team. We don't actually measure it at that level right now, but we have a general sense of where issues are coming from. And anytime we see issues like that, we use it as an opportunity to try to engage with the team in question so that we can help make sure that we prevent those issues upstream from happening in the future. I won't pretend it's like a scientific report I can spit out that says, this team has, this level of maturity and this team. No, we don't really have that, but we do kind of proactively, identify areas. And it all depends on the scope too, because some issues might be, like you might have 30 issues from a team, but they're not really customer impacting, and you might have one issue that's really tiny, but it's really like prominent and affects a lot of people. So, it's kind of depends on what the issues are.
Yeah. At Autodesk, we measured this very extensively and we called it the scorecard. So after every product release, we would, assess the number of JIRA defects and systematically create these reports. But it was a very manual process. And it also kind of felt like we were the localization police. And it probably didn't feel very good to some of those development teams to be called out, at project reviews at that level. So we have scaled back and we're not doing those any longer, but people will still come to us and want to engage. We'll offer consulting. We'll go into their source and help them change things. These are ad hoc requests. They don't come all that often. It really depends on the product and the acquisition and where they want to go to market. So we can provide those services, but that's not and we call it globalization as a service or GLAS. But we no longer do those scorecards because they were manual. They took a lot of work and it didn't go over too well.
So I'm in sort of full transparency mode here. I double checked that question because it sounded very familiar, and I have to admit that question was asked by somebody on my team. And I think that's great. Sorry, Kana, for putting you on the spot. What we're doing and what hopefully inspired that question is like we are building a maturity model. And so I feel like we're somewhere between you, Nataly, and you, Jennifer, where in terms of that journey, which is really great. But yeah, so we're hoping to get a easier not scorecard. Right now it's very manual, like you said, that will, on a very high level, both capture sort of a state in terms of product readiness, both for globalization, but also hopefully for accessibility. It's a journey. It's something that was prompted by C staff, and not sort of a bottoms up kind of thing, although I love the bottoms up of that because I'm hoping that it will also enable my team to have better conversations that are more fruitful rather than just saying, can you please fix this bug? But we'll see. So maybe if we do this again, I can give you an update, but I wanted to let you know that that was from my side of the house, so to say.
Well, knowing that this is something you're working on now, one thing that might, I don't know if it's helpful or not, but one thing we've managed to do recently is get certain types of internationalization issues, bugs, basically rolled into an existing SLA for product teams. So that way it has to go into their, like basically it gets recategorized as something that they have a specific SLA assigned to. So we're pretty judicious in which ones we retag that way because we don't want to be just annoying everybody with small things. But that has been a really great way to flag the ones that are super high priority to make sure that they get actioned more quickly. So in case it's of any interest.
Thanks.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you. So we have time for one more question, and it's kind of a long multi-part one on MT, machine translation, if you're tuning in and you're a newbie. How do you use MT in your localization workflow? Do you use a free crowdsourced option? Do you pay a subscription to a specific MT provider? Do you utilize those providers' API or APIs? Are you creating and training your own customized MT models? Combination? What training platforms have worked for you?
Yes, no, I'm just kidding. So we do use APIs. We do custom training of engines ourselves. That's one of the big things that I'm glad we have an internal linguistic team to help us with. We could, of course, outsource that through our vendors as well. And we do use a combination of different engines. Like we're testing different ones. Sometimes, some are better at some languages than others. We're trying to build things that are flexible enough that we can be engine agnostic, so we can easily use the best the best engine for this language versus that language. But yeah, we're doing all of those things.
Do you want me to go next, Teresa? Okay. So yes, and no, and yes. I can't remember the order. Pretty much similar to Nataly and Hubspot at Autodesk. We've got we use Microsoft Widget for support pages. We looked at some open source options. We ended up going with a private solution. We train our engines. And then we did all kinds of A/B testing between. So we trained our engines on version 1.0, and then we did all these tests across the 13 languages, and we compared that with Amazon and Microsoft and one or two other providers, and our quality was very close. And then our version 2.0, after we retrained those engines, our quality actually surpassed those providers. So we're very happy with those results. And we moved 2 years ago from statistical machine translation to neural machine translation. And that's where we're getting the highest quality increases. It made a huge difference.
So we're also at the beginning of that journey, and we're working with our own applied research team to develop our own API on that. We've had some great research that was recently published, and that's the beginning of that. And therefore, because it's internal, it's a little bit different in terms of setup. It also sort of makes some of the projects that we can run with a little bit more different because difficult because we have to be very aware of where the boundaries are, legal boundaries are, who we can partner with, and what we can use as part of our own research versus as part of something that we publish. So it's really the beginning of our journey. It's quite interesting. I think what you described, Jennifer, I think Autodesk has been always the example of probably one of the most mature machine translation processes out there. So that's it's always fascinating to have you talk about that.
Thank you, everyone. We have one more minute on the call. So I'd just like to thank all of you again for so graciously taking time to have this conversation. I don't know if you were following along with the comments, but people really enjoyed it. And I enjoyed it as well. And thank you also to Zoho and to our interpreters again. Did you have any closing comments before we sign off?
Well, this has been a fun opportunity, and thanks again for the invite. I'd be happy to return. We have another month left of summer officially, so hopefully there's another series in the future.
Yeah, I want to echo that. Thank you so much for the invitation. Thank you for the panel. I think it was a really great conversation, in particular because we didn't know exactly where this is going to go. It's always more fun to be spontaneous. Thank you for hosting it, Katie. I really appreciate it, and it's always fun to see you ladies.
Yeah, thank you.
Likewise, thank you. And if we decide to do a summer one for the other hemisphere, I'll be happy to join, even if it's winter.
There you go.
But yes, thank you. I always love learning from Teresa and Jennifer and all your experiences. And thank you, Katie, for a great moderating experience too. It was very fun.
All right, thank you to all of you. And this video should be up. I'm not sure when, but it will be up at some point. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.